The 4th of July celebration, 250 years of so-called American history is coming up, and I've got a lot to get off my chest. I don't know where they have the gall to call this the 250th anniversary or birthday of a country, because we don't really have a country anymore. And it's been like that for a long time. You know what a state is? A state is an actual community. It's a place that has leadership, that looks out for its own people. And that's not what this is anymore. And it hasn't been like this for a really long time. Because if you're thinking about how badly you're treated today, there might not be a single face to all this because it's multiple faces. It's like some stupid hydra that just keeps popping up because that's how this government is structured. You might have a different president, you might have different congressmen, but it doesn't really matter because at the end of the day, this country is not a real country. It's a place that is owned by a set of corporations and by people who aren't even working inside the corporations, whether they're the CEO or the president or somebody else. It's not any of that. You know what I call the USA? I call it the United Scams of America. Or if you want, you could call it the United Schemes of America. It doesn't really matter which one it is, because it sure as hell isn't states. They're scams and they're schemes. And all my life, I have been told lies, because all of them were just another scheme or another scam that I've been told to buy into. Go to college? That's a scam. Put your money into the stock market? That's a scam. But you know what? This isn't even the first time this kind of thing happened in American history. Let me tell you about something they call the Homestead Act. You know, this sounds really adventurous and everything. You go out to this new territory, you settle it, and the land is yours. But that's not how it works, because who's in this land? Yeah, it's the Native Americans, or if you want to call them the Indians. I don't think they really care what you call them. But they're there, and they're not happy you're there. And guess what? The whole point of this is that you'll go out there and you'll do this labor for them, and this land is terrible, and they're going to come over, and they're going to burn down your house, and they're going to be raping your women, and then the local troops, who are supposed to be basically the police, they don't get there. They don't get there for hours, for days, maybe ever at all. Does that sound a little familiar? Thing called the Homestead Act, where you would go there and then you would basically farm the land, which basically means you did all the dirty work at getting that really garbage land under control. I mean, you couldn't really grow stuff in this place. You would go out maybe to hunt for the animals that were eating the grasses there, but this isn't a place that you could really grow crops in. That's why we had the Dust Bowl not too long after. Geologically speaking, that wasn't very much time between when that was so-called settled, and then you had literally the whole place turned to dust. And now I'm finding out that not only was this the case, not only did your federal government screw over your white straight males, all right, because everybody talks about white straight males, and you're going to be lying to yourself if you say that they didn't have it better than whatever minority you want to say. But at the same time, you're definitely lying to yourself, or you're just too ignorant of history if you don't recognize that these guys didn't have it very good either. You could be a straight white male, but if you didn't have the money, your life wasn't very good either. They exploited you and they worked you like a dog. What I'm hearing here is that what they did to these guys who settled land, did all the grunt work, was that they basically tricked. I'm talking about corporations again, because guess what? They're bad guys now. They were bad guys back then. They were bad guys when they were selling opium to the Chinese. They were always the bad guys. And that's just how it is. Because a corporation is just a bunch of organized thieves. All right? They might be on the so called right side of the law, but look at their heart, look at their spirit. It's the same thing as thieves. Okay? Especially people who are making money off of the stock market. Okay? Those guys are thieves too. Because what they want to do is they want to take your money. What they want to do is they are always plotting to take somebody else's money. They didn't really build a company. They bought a stock, hoped that somebody else would buy it, and then they sold it when the price got high. They took your money. But let me go talk about the corporations back in the days of settlement. They would trick, apparently, this is what I've been told, they would trick the settlers into signing away the rights of their land in exchange for a really small salary. That's what apparently happened, because they're always up to something, because you live in the United Schemes of America. Or better yet, why don't we call it something better? The Unlimited Schemes of America, because that's really what this is. You know, you think you might be able to go back far enough in time to go all the way back, and you say, well, we had some good times then. No, you didn't. You never did. Let me tell you about this president here, all right? His name is George Washington. Yeah, the very first guy. And everybody says good things about him because ever since you were in kindergarten, you were taught that he was such a great guy. But I'm not here to talk about him owning slaves. All right, everybody knows about that. What I'm here to talk about is the time that he brought out a whole army behind his back, literally behind his back, and suppressed people who were unhappy with being taxed. Because what happened after the Revolutionary War, okay, which is, by the way, not a great name because there wasn't really a revolution. There wasn't really a the government that we have now established after that. It took them 6 years to write what we know as the Constitution. It's not even the same thing at all today anyway. But let's not even look at that. It's not a revolution because they didn't go over to Britain and replace the dynasty. But I guess I'm getting a little more academic than I really need to be here. Look, what's up with George Washington? All right, George Washington. All right, you have this thing called the Constitution. Okay, believe it or not, it wasn't that popular for its time because there was already the Articles of Confederation, and it worked from the communist perspective pretty well. What the Constitution does is that it establishes this really powerful framework of federal government over all these states. The states at the time were actually trying to solve the people's problems. And then you have this federal government being established and these sorts of constitutional conventions, right? When was the last time you showed up to a convention of any sort where you weren't already interested in that subject? People don't do that. You don't show up to an anime convention having no interest in anime. You don't show up to a video game convention never having played that video game. That's not how this works. But anyways, you have this appearance of popularity, and then you get these states to go ahead and say, okay, all right, let's do this Constitution thing. But what's the Constitution really about? It's about money. All right, it's about this worthless currency called the you know the continental script. It's a long story, but you can look it up. The point is, what do they do with this federal government? They raise taxes. All right, they had this thing called the whiskey tax, and that led to what's called the Whiskey Rebellion, and that's where George Washington, the patron saint of all presidents, comes out with a literal army behind his back, and he says some grandiose words, but it's really clear what's going to happen if they don't disperse. So what are they going to do? So they leave. And that's not the only rebellion that took place around this time. And remember, the only difference between being called a rebellion and a so-called revolution is whether you win. And they lost. Yeah, let's talk about the Constitution a bit here. Because you've got this thing that so-called guarantees your rights. Come on, there's like 10 of these things, and they're not even that well written. All right? I mean, look at how weak some of these things are. They're all like, well, if it's reasonable or something. Come on, that's nonsense. That's crap. And you know what? They're amendments. They're 10 amendments. They're afterthoughts. Because the point of the Constitution isn't really so that you have rights. You already have those rights. You had those rights back in the days of the Articles of Confederation. You had those rights back when you were British subjects. All right? It's really a question of whether your government chooses to abide by it or not. And that's the Articles. The Articles actually give people, different people, power, and they can ignore the rest of the Constitution or not if they want to. I know that's a little bit of a simplification, but you know what? If you actually look at history, you'll know how many times the Supreme Court is supposed to be able to do something and they just get ignored, or they get threatened, or the president goes, "Well, maybe we need more judges." Back to today, because we have these rights and they're on this piece of paper, but it doesn't matter. If you look at the Soviet Union Constitution, it has a lot more rights than the ones that are written in ours. And it doesn't matter because if the people that the become the leaders because the Constitution sets up a way to become powerful, if those powerful guys don't give a damn about you, it's not going to happen. So what am I supposed to be happy about? It's the 4th of July, 250 years of so-called America. Well, this country has changed so many damn times during that period that I don't think we're even on the end of the first thing. I mean, when you get to the end of the Civil War, it's a different country. When you get to past World War II, it's probably changed a couple times already. Now, I'm not going to even get started on what happened in 2001. If you know, you know, right? I mean, I'm not just saying that. You would know it if you lived through it. If you knew what life was like before 2001 and what life gradually became after, you know there's a huge difference. And we're not going to go back because whatever you grew up with, if you're old enough, whatever you grew up with, it ain't alive anymore. I think you know that. So 250 years? Are you kidding me? I don't think we're even, whatever this is, hasn't even really been around for more than, what, a quarter century? Barely? You can't find a job. You're going to get screwed in the job market. They tell you to have a bunch of dogs and cats rather than having your own children. And you've got a lot of people telling themselves they're so delusional, they'd rather tell themselves, oh, I just don't want to have children. Well, why don't you want to have children? Because this trash, whatever this is, because it ain't a country anymore, whatever this is, has made life so hard for you that the idea of having children is crushing. So this day, this 4th of July, do whatever you want. I guess it doesn't really matter. Because America has already collapsed. It's gone. You know, having collapsed doesn't mean that there's no people around. It doesn't mean that there are no buildings left standing. Look at the Romans. Their colosseums, they're still standing around today. They're still around. There's still some descendants. But the difference is when you don't have your apology anymore, it's because nothing works. And nothing works. Your money holds no value. Your investments are a joke. There's this huge AI bubble that's about to pop anytime soon. You can find a job. You're lucky to have children. Hey, if you want independence, you want a natural revolution, well, this ain't the day to celebrate. But I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm not going to be celebrating something that isn't there, something that, for all I care, never really existed. I'm not going to be doing that. I'm going to be working on some things that I need to do, that I want to do. I'm going to get them done because whatever this is, it's not worth celebrating. And it's much less keeping it around. It's not worth celebrating. It's not worth keeping around. Does this mean I'm giving up on life? No, of course not. I'm going to be doing my own things. But I'm tired of not speaking the truth.